Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be the last video, or not the last video, but the last video we talk about CAN bus sniffing, reverse engineering, whatever the hell you want to call it. This is definitely going to be the most dry video, and I apologize in advance. I could film it with me sitting in the car and doing this inside the car on the laptop, but actually I have a lot of the data already from when I previously did this, and I think it's easier for us to kind of go over it while we're on the computer. Today we're going to be doing specifically a Subaru car via Subaru Select Monitor, which is sort of its diagnostic protocol, and we're going to be making active requests to the ECU using an access port. This may or may not apply to other brands or manufacturers of cars. My assumption is that it does. I think that cars after 2008 are required to have CAN bus on their OBD port, and CAN bus is significantly faster in transmitting information than the OBD protocol or K-line. So I think a lot of manufacturers probably would have moved their diagnostic stuff to the CAN bus. And so, although this might not be specific to your car, I would wager that it's somewhat similar. So if you're working on another car, chances are this type of methodology is going to work. And if you have access to a diagnostic tool that you can sniff its interaction between the tool and the ECU, something like this is going to help you kind of expose what's going on and then map out the CAN bus, as well as make your data logger mimic that diagnostic tool. Okay, so the first things first, we're going to plug in our access port to the OBD port, and we're going to make sure our data logger is connected to the CAN bus. I'm going to make sure that my data logger has a CAN bus logger script inside of it so that I can dump the CAN bus network packets. And then I'm going to go to my access port and change the gauge layout so that it is only displaying one parameter. Now I know you can do a bunch of different ones, but we want one parameter because we want to control the amount of information being sent or requested from the ECU. Now, the first kind of hurdle that we have to cross is understanding where to look for this request and this reply. And I want to give thanks out there to a website called Subaru Diesel or Subdiesel. They were a website dedicated to kind of decoding onboard diagnostics via the OBD port as well as CAN bus. They're gone now. I don't know what happened to them, why the website was taken down. There's cached versions out there, but the big takeaway from that website that I got was that onboard diagnostic tools communicating on the CAN network for Subarus is done via CAN channel 2016. So the tool will transmit its request on CAN ID 2016. And then the ECU is going to reply on CAN ID 2024. So that narrows our search down significantly because we know exactly where to look. So what we're going to do is in that access port, change the gauge layout to one parameter and then start with something simple, like in this case, intake manifold. So you see here, I've got a dump for intake manifold. So once you've changed the parameter to intake manifold, launch PuTTY, type in view log, hit enter. It's going to dump out the CAN network and then go ahead and close it and then open the file. And this is what you're going to get. So I've already filtered everything out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm specifically interested, as I mentioned earlier, in CAN ID 2016 and 2024. Now, these numbers don't look like decimal numbers, and they're actually hexadecimal numbers because I was using an Arduino with a CAN shield to dump the CAN bus. And that particular library definition, or whatever you want to call it, that program dumped everything in hexadecimals. But trust me when I say that 7E0 is 2016 decimal. And you know what? I'll just show you that because I have it pulled up. 78 or 70, 2016, right? And then E8 is going to be 2024. Okay, so I am looking at the set of, I'm looking at all the packets that were sent from the access port to the ECU. These are essentially our requests. And if I filter down by the first byte position, I can see that there were two different types of packets. And the first one is 010, 0x10, and the second one is 0x21, and they're all exactly the same. So I'm going to copy each of those packets, and I'm going to put it in a spreadsheet where I can keep it safe. I've done that here, and I've created a sheet called sent packets, right? And it's kind of like my library of packets, and you can see here intake manifold temperature. So I've placed it here, and then I'm going to go back and look at the replies from the ECU. So I'll go to 7E8 or 2024, and it looks like I've got two different types of packets. So I'll look at this one. They're all the same. I'll take that, copy it, and paste it in a sheet for my receive packets, and make sure to go get the one that starts with 0x30. Okay, so I'm kind of like building out my library now. The other thing I want to do is make sure I record my real world value that I am seeing on my access port. So this is very similar to what we did on the Durametric piece of software. Same rationale here. We're just going to write that down so that we can verify our formulas afterwards. And what I did was I put it in the name of the file, and I actually think this file is named incorrectly. I must have mistyped it. I think it's 131, not 113, and you'll see why in a little bit later when we come back to this. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is systematically do this for every single parameter you are interested in, one by one. On the single gauge, do not do more than one at a time. You're going to set the access port to whatever that parameter is, do a quick can log, and then copy all of the unique packets being sent on 2016 and 2024. And so that's what you see over here. There's a boatload of packets here for multiple different parameters being sent from the access port to the ECU as a request for a particular piece of information. And then over here you see all the packets being sent on CAN channel 2024, and these are all the unique packets being sent from the ECU as in reply to the request from the access port. Okay, don't really need to concern ourselves with the sent packets, right? What we want to concern ourselves with is the receive packets. And if we start to look into these packets and make comparisons, we can start to see that in some instances they look the same. Okay, so if we look at this one, 0x30 00000, 0x30 0000, this seems to be like a termination packet, or it's like the last thing that's transmitted. And because it's the same across all the parameters, we can essentially ignore it. We want to look for things that are unique, because the unique ones are likely going to be the bytes that contain the information that we want. Sub Diesel or Subaru Diesel, that web page also told me that the data that we're interested in will always follow the byte that says 0E8. So anything preceding this byte is not interesting to us, and we want to look at what's following it. Okay, so now we have these hexadecimal values or these decimal values, and we need to get a formula that will convert them into a real world value. And as we were going through making each of these logs, hopefully you were writing down the real world value you were seeing on your access port. Okay, now we need the formulas, and in this case you could do like a linear regression like we did before, but that might require that you do more than one log, so you can get 2 data points or 3 data points, but there's a shortcut. There is a forum out there called Rom Raiders, and they're focused on providing or hacking ECUs to do open source tuning. And one of the byproducts of this process is what they call a logger definition. Essentially, it's a database that defines all the parameters that you can log on this open source ECU. So given that they do it for Subarus and as well as some other brands, I'm looking at the file for formulas. They call them expressions, formulas, all the same thing. So we can see here there's formulas for converting their byte values to coolant temperature. Here's one for Fahrenheit. Here's one for Celsius. Here's one for converting a byte value for AF correction, AF learn, excuse me, manifold absolute pressure, engine speed. So instead of having to go through and try to figure out what the formula is, I would suggest you look for something like this. Now, if it's Subaru, go to Rom Raiders. They got some other manufacturers as well. However, if there's open source tuning for your car, chances are somewhere someone has this information and you just have to find it. And if they don't, you can always do some linear regressions like we did on the previous video and try to figure out what the formula is by mapping out multiple data points. Okay, so let's see here. Let's do intake manifold temperature again. Okay, so as we recall, I wrote down the intake manifold temperature. It should have been 131, not 113. And if I look at my intake manifold temperature library, the only values after E8, the only bytes after E8 that contain anything of interest are these three. Okay? And so I don't know what the real world value of the log was of this parameter when I took it, but I know what it was in this one, so we're going to work with this file. So here's the E8, and here are the three bytes of interest. And I've already converted these hexadecimal bytes into decimals, which are here, and then here is the formula. So once we apply the formula to these decimal values, these are the results. And I know this is again 131, so I know that these two bytes, which are these here, are incorrect, and that this byte, which is this one, is the one that's correct. So inside of my library, I've highlighted that position green, knowing that that is the byte that I want to look for. Okay, so you're going to go through that process for every single parameter. You're going to figure out the right byte, you're going to figure out the right formula. And just so you know, some of these parameters inside the Cobb unit and maybe the other diagnostic tools are, I would almost call them virtual parameters. And a good illustration of this is boost. So I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out how to decode these two bytes into boost. And I didn't understand why it was two values. I knew it was two values because if I looked at the CAN data, these two values were constantly changing. And this one was the same, but I couldn't figure out the formula to take these two bytes and turn it into boost. And it turns out one byte is manifold pressure and the other byte is atmospheric pressure. And manifold pressure minus atmospheric pressure gives you boost. So really, the parameter boost wasn't calling on a parameter called boost or inside of the ECU. It was calling for two parameters. It was calling for manifold pressure and atmospheric pressure. And then it was virtually doing math and calculating the difference between the two and then providing me with boost. So there are some parameters inside the Accessport that I would say are kind of like these virtual parameters, and you have to be careful when you're looking for them. A very good hint might be seeing 2 bytes instead of 1. That might not always be the case because some parameters do come in 2 bytes, like air-fuel ratio. So it takes a little bit of sleuthing to kind of figure it out. Let's see. Is that it? Is that all I want to say about that? I think that is all I want to say about that. Okay, so once you've created this library and you've got these formulas, what do you do next, right? You've only been able to figure out one parameter at a time, and you can't request one parameter at a time. It's just too slow. So the way the access port requests multiple parameters is if you go into not the gauge section but the logging section, you can scroll down a list and select the different parameters that you want to record. And I would select them alphabetically just because I don't know if selecting them out of order does anything. So I've always selected them in order. And once you select them in order, you can then close out that menu, hit the record button, and then do another dump of the CAN bus. And if you do a dump, and you go and you look at, I don't know why this is doing this. And so what I've also done is I've written down, taken note of the parameters in order that I've selected them, and I've put them over here. And this is the set of CAN packets being transmitted from the access port to the ECU. So this is on CAN ID 2016. I don't know why it's doing that. There we go. And so what you'll see is instead of something simple like this, we now have way more packets being sent out across the CAN bus. And this is your CAN ID, and then these are your byte positions, right? Or in some cases, like on the Racecapture, it'll start at 0. It'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first byte is what you call a sub ID. Because we are sending so many packets on the CAN ID of 2016, but making different requests in each one, the sub ID is sort of a way of allowing the ECU to know this is how to organize all of these packets to create one message, right? And so it'll always start with 10, and I think always end in 30. You'll have to check, but it's an incremental order. And so when you filter out your IDs, just make sure that you grab all of them, okay? And in essence, that's all you need in terms of mimicking the access port or mimicking the diagnostic device. So what I've done here is I've taken all of these hexadecimal values and changed them over to decimal, which you probably won't need to do if you're dumping from the Racecapture. And then I've used a function in the spreadsheet to take these values and used the Racecapture function to transmit over the CAN bus these CAN packets. So essentially what is happening here is I've taken the set of packets that the access port is sending to make requests to the ECU, and I've created a function and programmed it into the data logger to mimic that same request. So in essence, the data logger is mimicking this access port or mimicking this diagnostic tool. And if done correctly, I should get the same type of response packets. So in that same CAN dump, now we look at CAN ID 2024, and this is the set of packets that we receive back. And similar to the send packets or the request packets, I'm sorry, just for continuity's sake, there's a sub ID. And again, the sub ID is there to organize the packets, right? Because the ECU is going to have to send out multiple packets on one CAN ID. So the sub ID is there to tell the diagnostic device or the access port how to organize the packets. And that organization matters. It matters because that's how we're going to decode our parameters. Now we've written down our parameters in the order in which we've selected them, and please select them alphabetically because I don't know if that affects anything. I've written them down here, and what I've noticed is through all of this, My byte values are gonna, essentially my parameter replies are gonna come in that order, and I've color coordinated them here, right? So yellow for airfield correction, orange for AF learn, this kind of like darker pink for air-fuel ratio, and if I know what using my library how many bytes it's supposed to be, I can pretty much just go through and look. Okay, AF correction, 1 byte, and I know it has to follow E8, so boom, that's my AF correction. AF learn, 1 byte, boom, that's going to be my next one. AFR, oh, it's 2 bytes. Okay, so it's going to be the next 2 bytes, and highlight, and I'll go down the list, boom, 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 boom. The other thing is you can double check this back, right? So here I've got some values, and what I did was when I hit that logger button, the Accessport created a log file, engine was running. Try to keep that log file very short so that these values aren't going too far one way or the other. And I just went into that logging file and I put in the values that I saw. Now that I've highlighted each of these bytes and what I think they are, I can simply take the formula for this parameter and then convert this decimal back to a real world value and see if I'm correct. So here 7B is hexadecimal, which I think I did earlier, 123. So I took the formula that I have for AF learning, which is this, and replaced x with 123, and it gave me a value of -3.90. And for that, inside of the log, it was -3.91. So I can go through and double check everything. And if everything comes through and it looks correct, then I know I've correctly mapped out my response packets. So once I've mapped out my response packets, I need to create a CAN map. And so that's essentially what I've done here. I know everything is going to be on CAN ID 2024. I've looked at the sub ID of where my byte lies. So for AF correction, it's up here. So my sub ID is 0x10. For something like ethanol raw, it's 2 bytes, and it's on sub ID 0x21. So I've written that all down, and then I've written the bytes. And so these are all, I'm sorry, these are all going to be shifted because I started with 1. So again, remember it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that would, hopefully that looks clearer to you. So this yellow one, AF correction 4, byte 4, AF learn, excuse me, this orange color, dark orange color, byte 5, byte 5. So that is my CAN mapping, right? And over here I still have my formulas. So I'll pull up my Racecapture system and start to punch those in. So as you can see here, that is exactly what I've done. Every single one of these CAN IDs, minus some of this other stuff, which is from the analog X, is on channel 2024. And if I hit enter, which one, intake temperature, go in here, channel 2024, sub ID. I've got my sub ID here, so I've got to take this, like for example 0x22, convert that to a decimal number 33, go back to my Racecapture, and I would select the appropriate sub ID, which is what that represents. Make sure I'm on the right CAN bus, right? And then I can enter my bit length, which I know is 1 because it's only 1 byte for that. And I know the position. So again, this says 4, but I know on Racecapture I start at 0, so this is going to be byte 3. So offset, which is the position, and then the length, which is 1 byte. And then I can enter my formula. And that's pretty much it. I go through, I enter all of them, and I'm done. The only thing I need to do is go back into my script and make sure that I have the set of transmit commands for the Racecapture to mimic the Accessport or the datalogger, or I'm sorry, the diagnostic tool. And that is it. That is pretty much how you take an access port or a diagnostic tool, sniff out the interactions, map the CAN bus packets, and then create sort of like a larger request of packets or a series of parameters that you're requesting, and then how to decode that interaction, right? So this library is very, very helpful because it forces you to find the byte positions and the formulas. And although those byte positions are going to change here, you'll at least know how many bytes you're looking for, right? And then you'll also know the formula, and once you're done, you can enter all that information into the data logger. Now, again, this only works with the Racecapture system because the Racecapture system can transmit, and I don't know if any of the other data logger systems can do the same, but that is the general idea. And again, to note, if you change the parameters you are requesting, you will change the replies. And so every time you make a change, you have to go through this process again. It should be relatively quick, especially if you have this library like we have here. And I think that just about covers sort of my last party piece when it comes to CAN bus. I really want to thank that Subaru Diesel website. I don't think I could have figured out any of this without them. They provided some invaluable tips through all of their guides. Got to thank Rom Raider. There's no way I would have figured out all these formulas as fast as I did without them. And also want to thank Cobb, right? Cobb was the first to do all of this reverse engineering, I think. And as you can see, without their tool, we wouldn't be able to sniff out, without the Accessport, we wouldn't be able to sniff out this interaction. We probably could do it if we had access to Subaru's actual diagnostic tool, which maybe that's how Cobb did it. But someone had to figure it out over there, and without them figuring it out, we couldn't figure it out over here. So shout out to all those guys. And hopefully this video helps you do the same on your Subaru, or at least gives you a couple of breadcrumbs into how to do it with your manufacturer of car. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask in the comment section. I will do my best to answer whatever comes up. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And the next video will be how we tie all of this together, right? So again, if you remember, we covered how to record multiple angles of video, how to record audio, and the different pieces of software that we use to put things together. Now we've covered how to get high levels of data from your car. And lastly, we're going to stitch that all together to create a video that has multiple angles, some decent audio, and some really detailed overlays. So until the next video, guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Take care.